Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Kwiklearn series today that's entitled Smart Reports in Snap again, which I will be with Nathan Pichar, the training manager in Snap and expert when it comes to smart reports in Snap. But before I hand it over to him, I will give you small details regarding Snap, and we'll go first to the first slide that we have to the solutions that Snap can provide us. So first we have the questionnaire design, which can help you with your survey design templates and branding, advanced setup and complex functionality, multi-language surveys, and much more. That's under survey design expertise, which can give you a questionnaire to gather useful and reliable data. Under that, we also have templates and branding that can give you questionnaire, can gather useful, and then a complex questionnaire setup. We also have that for us to set up a complex questionnaire. We also have survey distribution and data collection, which under online survey that can set up online surveys and can host it. We have also paper surveys and multi-mode surveys. The data collection team of us, you can scan paper survey questionnaire alongside using your Snap file, Excel, SPSS, or CSV format that is ready to be analyzed. We also have copy surveys, which will be used for telephone interviewing, or can set up surveys using your Snap mobile anywhere. You can interview people in the field using that, using your mobile phone or any gadgets that you have. And next, lastly, for the Snap solution, we have analysis and reporting. That's under smart reports that we have. I'll give you some small things regarding smart reports. Smart reports is where you can be able to produce multiple complex variation of reports. It all analyze the commentary, can quickly tailor to show results of your perspective of your reports, like individual, region, department of your team. So smart reports can also include conditional sections, something like that. So that's the thing that Nathan will give you more about smart reports later. Next slide we have here is Snap software can have surveys in any language. You can design, distribute, analyze questionnaire in any language. You can design and branding. You can do it with complete flexibility, your and like your organization brand, logo, or colors. We Snap also have a two-way database link, which you can also personalize with your database and survey templates. We also have Snap also have multi-format surveys where you can scan paper replies accurately and quickly. You can distribute surveys online on paper fields or on your mobile devices. Of course, Snap also have as offline data collection where you can collect data out in the field using your Snap mobile anywhere. And lastly, we have paper survey scanning where you can manage survey schedule online using SMS, email invites, email reports, and you can easily scan unlimited paper questionnaire using your paper survey scanning. And then, of course, next slide that we have is Snap has a branded questions. That's the sample of the branded question that we have where you can have a customer touch point. You can create questionnaire to look how you want to. It could be a plain or a paper. Next will be dynamic questionnaires. We can make it dynamic in the sense that things added, like the one that we have on the screen. Next, we have interactive questions with Snap. We can do that. You can improve response rate using your questionnaire in a colorful and interactive way. You can put images or brand or logo on your interactive questions. Next is responsive question where you can also sort things in response to your question. You can also select different stores that we have there, a second store or your possible favorite store that we have in your supermarket survey. Next, we have also in Snap the drag and drop. With drag and drop, the respondents can visually categorize and rank items without the requirements for your question grid. So it can be response from word or images. So that's all we have with Snap. So Snap also has an online surveys, which you can see there. You can do online survey, paper surveys, And also we have a mobile surveys in Snap. Okay, the next slide that we have is the lastly that we have in Snap is we have a powerful analysis and reporting, which we have the charts, cross tabulation, analysis tools, which can simplify your data with Snap using analysis tools. We also have summary report, which you can instantly view your report and your survey result using you can deliver key insight to your organization using Snap. And of course, lastly that we have is the smart reporting, where you can produce dynamic and flexible smart reports, and which you can produce multiple variation analysis and commentary updated in real time. And it's gonna be individual, region, department, or team. So with smart reporting, I will hand it over to Nathan, which is more expert when it comes to smart report, and he will give you all the details that I'm telling you regarding the Snap. So I'll hand it over to Nathan now. And anyway, if you have any questions, we will answer it after the presentation of Nathan later. Okay, Nathan?
Thanks, Nikki, and hi, everyone. Smart reporting is an amazing tool that can save you hours and hours of time each week creating reports, when you could be using that time to instead actually do something with your findings. There is, however, an initial outlay of time and effort that goes into creating these initial reports, ensuring that it seamlessly runs for each team, department, site, or area, and that it also correctly filters your data based upon the required date periods and makes the relevant comparisons when it comes to benchmarking your data. So in the short time that we've got here today, I'm not going to be able to go into too much detail into the hows and whys of what I'm going to be showing you, but hopefully it will give you a good indication of the power and complexity of what smart reporting can do for your business. So let's have a look at the plan for today. So cell referencing, this is taking dynamic content from your tables and charts and populating the commentary of your report. So as your data updates your individual tables and charts, information from those tables and charts is populated into the actual text of your report. Static benchmarking is comparing your live data against some kind of external known data set. So you might have a competitor's information data that you want to compare your live data with, or maybe you've just got some head office figures, some KPIs that you want to compare your data against. Global filtering is a way of mass producing or mass filtering all your tables and charts. So rather than having to filter them individually one at a time for a different department or different area, then we can set what's known as a global filter, and that will instantly filter all your reports or all your tables. Dynamic benchmarking is benchmarking your data, but this time against a dynamically changing benchmark. So rather than saying, how does our data compare against last year's data, we're saying, how does our data compare against the rest of the company, but the rest of the company now? So it's dynamically changing. We'll then look at actually using context to run the report. So that's how Snap produces multiple reports for each of your different departments. We'll look at a really powerful tool called Conditional Inclusion, which allows you to specify when certain areas of the report will display. And then finally, we'll look at reusing some of your reports. So having put all the effort in, you can become a lot more efficient by making use of different areas of that in different projects that you're working on. Okay, so the first topic we're going to look at today is cell referencing. And this is a really nice, simple addition to any report where you need to pull data from a table or chart into the commentary of the report. So as more and more data is collected, your tables and charts update, and your commentary is dynamically changing, taking into consideration the changes in your actual data. And in this simple example, you can see I've picked out some figures in bold where it's taking the data from the individual tables or the cells of the tables and populating the text below. So the fields are dynamically changing. And these are what's known as cell references. If I take you on to the next slide, you can see how these are calculated. So on the left-hand side, you can see I've highlighted the field very poor. And on the right hand side, that's known as R1 label. R1 stands for row number 1. Label is just the text. And then you can see, looking at 116, this time it's R4, so row number 4, but column number 1. So we have basically R's and C's, columns and rows, and these are what's known as cell referencing. But let's now move into Snap and have a look at this in action. So if I open up my table called T5 top bottom, so a fairly sort of standard table looking at rating sort of various questions on a scale of 1 to 5. You can see I've got the percent positive on the left hand side and the percent negative on the left hand side and the percent positive on the right hand side. And if I go into the notes of that table, you can see I have my commentary for my report, and I've got various areas of blue, which are what's known as cell references, and you can see it's just picking out the rows and the columns and the statistics. So negative is statistic number 1 and positive is statistic number 2. And if you look towards the end, I'm actually doing some calculations as well. So rather than having to do these on a weekly basis with a calculator or Excel or SPSS, where there's always a chance if you're doing it on a weekly basis that occasionally you might have some typos in your data. The idea is that you set this up once and then it's always going to be correct, assuming that we've obviously got our calculation right. Now, we've got two different ways of inserting these cell references. We can either insert and cell value field, or often it's a lot quicker just to right click on a cell and copy the cell reference, and then we can paste it in. But if I just do a very, very quick print preview of this one, it's not going to look wonderful because it is just an individual table. And you can see it's doing some calculations and picking out the various information. Okay, so that's cell referencing. If I just take you back into my PowerPoint. And cell referencing is not just about sort of putting the references into the text underneath a table or chart. In this example, I've actually cell referenced into the introduction to my report. So you can see I've highlighted them in yellow just to highlight what I'm talking about here. So I've picked out things like the response rates and how many people have filled it in online and paper, and how this year's response rate compared to last year's response rate. And you can see, just to make my report a bit easier to read, I've also picked out the top 3 performing areas and the bottom 3 performing areas. Okay, so a really powerful tool, cell referencing, which you would tend to use completely throughout your report. Okay, next up, we've got an example of benchmarking to show you. Now, when reporting, you've often got targets or KPIs or perhaps just competitor information that you need to compare your data with. So comparing your live data with a known static value. So in this example, I'm comparing my percent positive for various scale questions against my target. So my live data is the blue bars and my target data is the green marker squares. Okay, so again, if I open this up into Snap itself, so as mentioned, the data in the blue bar is my live data, and that will be refreshed every time that I open up this table or chart, or every time I run the report. And then the markers is the fixed data. So that's manually input data. And I said this could simply just be a target that head office have given us, or it could be last year's data that you don't have in Snap, or just data that you found online. But either way, it's data which was not in Snap. We've manually input that in. If I go into the properties of this table, it's using a weight to calculate the percent positive. So I'll go and have a look at the weight. So WT3. So it's basically picking out so this is on a scale of effectively 1 to 5, or very poor to very good. So I'm making my weight pick out the very good and the good, and ignoring the very poor, the poor, and the sort of neutral marker in the middle. So that's the weight which is being used. It's also using a derived variable called benchmark. So if I have a quick look at that derived variable, I go into my variables window, the 1 and the 2. Down the bottom, I've got my benchmark variable. And it's picking out my live data, which is the blue text, and then my manual data, which I manually input, is the second row of data. Okay, I just close that down. So as I said, every time we update the table or chart, or every time we open the table or chart, the blue data will change. The green markers will stay the same. Obviously, next year, you may well get new targets. So it's a case of going back into the properties, converting this chart to a table, and then just manually double clicking on your figures and adding in your new targets. And then when you've finished, just convert it back to a chart again. Okay, so that's what we call static benchmarking. A bit later, we will look at dynamic benchmarking, which is where we're comparing our live data, so the blue bar, but this time against a dynamically changing benchmark rather than a permanently fixed one. Okay, next up, we're going to have a look at a quick way of mass filtering lots and lots of tables and charts. So typically, you may have a number of tables and charts set up, and you need to run them off for different departments, areas, dealerships, whatever it is that you need to compare your data by. So sometimes you're running a report for one department, another time you're running a report for a different department. So again, if I just move back into Snap, and I'm just going to move into my tables and charts. So as you can see, I've got lots and lots of tables and charts, so probably about 20 or 30 different tables of charts. They're all saved, and I've got in my survey, if I take you into the actual survey itself, I've got a question which is who was your instructor or who was your trainer today. So I've potentially got 4 different reports that I need to run one for each trainer or instructor. And that question, if I single click on it, down the bottom, you probably can't quite see it because it's quite small, but it says instructor. So the name of that question is called instructor. Now, if I open up one of my tables, so I've got a table here called C4 context stack. So you can see at the moment, this is the results for Harriet. If I go into the properties of that table or that chart, you can see I've got a filter on there saying instructor equals 2, which is Harriet. If I change it to instructor equals 1, it changes to myself. If I change it to instructor number 3, it goes to Margaret, one of the other instructors. Now, obviously, I've got 4 different instructors. I may well have 50 different instructors. So I really don't want to be going into this chart and changing this from 1 all the way up to 50. And I definitely don't want to be going into all these other tables and charts and changing those as well. So this is where we're going to introduce what we call a global filter. So if I just save that for the time being, and if I go up to File and Context Values, in there we have something called a global context. So if I double click on that one, and you can see I've got a couple of questions in here, the college question, but more importantly for the time being, we have the instructor question. And at the moment it's set to number 2, which is Harriet. So answer number 2. If I change that to number 1, you can see it changes to me. Change it to number 3. Again, back to Margaret. But I'll leave it on number 2 for the time being and just save that. If I now go back into my original table, so rather than saying instructor equals 1 or 2 or 3, instead I'm going to type something a little bit stranger, but instructor equals instructor at context, which is basically saying, have a look at the context, see what number it's set to, and basically make it that. So really it's saying instructor equals 2 at the moment. And if I go and open up another couple of charts, so I've got one called C5 context bar. You can see that's automatically set to Harriet, and context radar, that one's also set to Harriet. So basically any of these tables or charts which have the filter of instructor equals instructor at context, every time I want to run the report for Harriet, all I actually need to do is go up to File and Context and change it there. And then when I want to run it for Margaret, again, I go into Context and change it there. Okay. So it's just a way of quickly filtering lots and lots of tables and charts, but just by doing one click at making one change rather than having to make lots and lots of changes to multiple tables and charts. Okay, now this global filtering actually allows us to move into our next topic called dynamic benchmarking. So dynamic benchmarking is where we're comparing our live data with a live benchmark, which is always going to be changing. So in this example, I'm comparing Harriet, one of my individual instructors, against all the other instructors. So all 3 of these bars will be changing every time a different person fills in this survey. Whilst earlier, the first 2 bars were changing, the last bar was static. Okay, so this is why this is what we call dynamic benchmarking. Okay, so again, let's move back into Snap. And if I look at C2C compare, so here's the chart we were just looking at on the PowerPoint. And if I go into the properties of this chart, so again, it's using a weight to work out the percent positive, but more importantly, it's using a derived variable called compare. So let's go and have a look at that derived variable. So it's called compare. And you can see it's making use of that global filter that we had earlier. So the first row of data is picking out the particular instructor. So at the moment, my context is set to Harriet. So effectively the first row is Harriet, and you can see that in the chart. It's Harriet. The second row is everyone apart from Harriet. So you can see it's saying all instructors excluding Harriet. So it's basically saying don't include Harriet. And then the final row is my overall benchmark, which is basically everyone. So the final row does include Harriet as well. Okay, so again, if I was to go up to my context and change this to number 3, so Margaret, you can see my chart is now says out of date. If I give it a quick kick with the 1, 2, 3, you can see everything's changed now. All the instructors stayed the same, but all the other bits of data changed because it's now all based on Margaret or excluding Margaret or everyone else. Okay, I'll put it back to Harriet. Okay. Now, in your reports, it's quite likely that you might want to occasionally compare your data against different things. So this one, looking at Harriet versus everyone else versus everyone. Whilst if I look at a different chart, so I've got C2C compare all. And this time it's looking at the individual trainer and then the college where that trainer works, so Harriet works at Beckington Hall, and then the overall local authority, which looks after all the different colleges. So perhaps there's maybe 15 different colleges in the local authority. So this is the data from all 15 colleges. This is just the college where Harriet works at, but it looks like Harriet's doing a little bit better than the rest of her colleagues at Beckington Hall. So again, if I go into the properties of this one, you can see this time it's using a different derived variable, so compare authority. So again, I'll go and have a look at that one. And this time we're making use of two different global filters. So we have the instructor equals instructor at context, like we were using earlier. We've still got the everyone, so true basically captures everyone regardless of who they are. But the middle row is saying, let's look at whatever college it is. Okay, so yes, in your reports, it's quite likely different reports will need to compare your data against different benchmarks. Okay, so let's now look at how we can pull these features together and produce a smart report. So a lot of the work actually goes into initially building all the tables and charts, all the derived variables in the first place. The easy bit, the nice bit really, is pulling that all together to actually produce the reports at the end. So if I go into my saved reports, I've got a number of different reports here today which I've created, but when you do go into the reports window back in on your own sort of version on Snap, you will always have a couple of reports in there by default. So we have the questionnaire report by default, and also the two summary reports by default. So for every table and chart or every survey that you have in Snap, you will instantly have a couple of sort of default reports. The summary report, just whilst we're here, it's quite a nice one. It looks like you've put quite a nice lot of effort into it, where actually all you did was press play and you've got a nice simple bar chart for every single tick box question. And if you've got any comments, it will give you the individual comments. And if you've got any number of response questions, I'm not sure if I've got any, in fact I have got some today, then you will get a mini statistics table. So the idea really is that it looks like you've produced something. It's hopefully something you can at least give to a manager or colleague, just to sort of, to a certain extent, keep them quiet whilst you're hopefully building your own bespoke report. So let's have a look at one of my bespoke reports. I'm going to go into RP1, which is just what I've just named it as a simple report. Now, in this report, you can see I've got a number of different tables in there. There's a couple which I sort of showed you earlier, actually. Many of those have that filter on there of instructor equals instructor at context. We've also got a number of page layouts, so things like page breaks, specifying whether it's landscape, how many columns. We've got some information windows in there, which is basically a bit like a blank piece of paper with some text on there. So that's your sort of text pages. And as I said, quite a few executions in there, which is the individual tables and charts. Now, if I run this report now, it will run the report for whichever the current context is set to. So remember, if I go back to File and Context Values, my context is currently set to number 2, so Harriet. And as I said, a lot of these tables and charts have the instructor equals instructor at context in them. So when I press the play button, obviously I could print them off to a printer or PDF if I wanted, but today, for the time being, I'm just going to preview those. And as you can see, I've got the results for Harriet. I've got some introduction text, and again, all these figures are dynamically changing. You can see I've got a couple of tables and charts again with some dynamically changing text. And then a couple of charts as well, all picking up Harriet's data. Okay, so that runs the report for just that one particular instructor. Obviously today I've got 4 different instructors, and you potentially would have many, many more. So I don't really want to have to go into global and change it to number 3 and then run the report, and then change it to number 4 and run the report, because as I said, you may well have 50 or more. So instead, in context, I'm going to type instructor. Now when I press the play button, I will now get 4 individual reports. So again, I'll just preview it today. So 1 report for me. Again, this is all data just for me. I then get 1 report for Harriet. And then Margaret. In fact, there's also Alex at the end. So, and remember, these are not just 4 separate reports with the word Harriet and Nathan and Margaret on there. They're actually 4 bespoke individual reports which are tailored to that individual person with their data, benchmarking their data as well. Okay. Let's have a look at one of my larger reports. So I've got RP2. Now, in the introduction to this report, I'm actually picking out the top 3 performing areas and the bottom 3 performing areas. So if I go into part of my introduction, so I've actually got an introduction broken into 2 sections, but number 6 is, in fact, I'll just quickly preview this. So this report is for me, for the time being at least. So here you can see I'm picking out the top 3 performing areas and then the bottom 3 performing areas. So for me, I've got friendliness of breakfast staff and speed of service at breakfast. If I go through to Harriet, again, I've got friendliness of the breakfast staff, but this time speed of service at lunch. So again, I'll just come out of this report and take you into the actual information window itself. And it's just making use of what I showed you right at the very beginning, which is cell referencing. So there's a big table somewhere hiding in the background. It's quite an ugly table, to be honest. No one's ever going to see it, so it doesn't really matter what that table looks like. But that table is sorted from top to bottom, and it's picking out row number 1 and the data for row number 1, and row number 2 and row number 3. So it's actually the top 3, and then it's picking out the very last 3 rows. Okay. So it's, as I said, a lot of the effort goes into building those tables and charts in the first place. In fact, I'll just go and quickly look at HL satisfaction. So as I said, it's quite a big, ugly table, but no one ever sees this. It's just hiding in the background, and then the individual data, the cell references from that table and chart, which will be ever changing. So remember, every time someone else fills in the survey, all this data will change, and of course they will also change order as well. Okay, and again, as you can see, this report is making use of instructor, which is why we were getting the 4 different reports. Okay, if I just preview this again. So if I move on to this page, again, you can see this report is actually making use of what I was showing you earlier in terms of the benchmarking. So again, appreciate you probably can't see this because it's quite small, but this is me on the left, this is everyone apart from me, and then on the right, this is everyone else. And again, you can see there's some calculations going on to work out the difference between those. So again, if I think I was 1% higher or lower, I can't remember now. If we look at Harriet, Harriet is 6% lower. Okay, so again, all my data, all my reports, all my commentary in my reports is dynamically changing. Now, as you can see, these reports, they do start to get quite busy, and the way to get all these information and tables and charts in there is a case of clicking on the single plus to insert whatever you want to insert. But yes, over a period of time, these can get quite busy. In fact, this is a fairly sort of standard plain sort of report, and it's already got 36 different instructions in there. So the good news is you can reuse a lot of this and make use of it in additional reports or additional projects in different surveys. And this is often easier to do when you break up your larger reports into smaller reports. So a simple example of this would be the fact that each of the reports I've showed you so far have had a cover page on there. So rather than every time I create a new report, I have to sort of build a new cover page, you can see I've actually got a report called cover page. And if I go into that one, it's just got 3 instructions, the general layout and the front cover, which has got my logo in there. You can see there's also some dynamic text in there where it's picking out today's date and what filters on the report. But it just means that every time I create a new report, rather than having to completely start from scratch, my starting point is actually a cover page. And you can see I've also got a blank page report in there. I've got an executive summary report, a results report. Okay. So with every report that you build, it will get quicker and quicker and easier because actually a lot of the work you've kind of done previously in other projects, and then you can just make use of those. And the same goes with derived variables and your tables and charts. They can all be exported from this survey into other surveys and just put into other reports. So if I have a look at report number 3, you can see that this is actually a report made up of 5 mini reports. So I've got my cover page, my blank page, the exec summary, etc., etc. Okay, again, I'm making use of instructor, so if I just quickly run this one, you can see I get my 4 different reports, picking up the top 3. Now, if this was printed off to PDF, this would actually give me 4 separate PDFs, and you can see it tells me that because it's saying document break. And I get Harriet, and then obviously Margaret, etc., etc. Okay. Now, as I said, the idea behind having these mini reports is so that every time you create a new report, you can start off with a cover page. But equally, you might want to make use of these in other surveys. So it's just a case of highlight whichever reports you want to take. So if I was to take the blank page and the cover page, up to the file menu and export. And then we transfer things between different surveys using what we call a SNF file. So actually stands for Snap Interchange Format. So basically file export, you can see it's only going to do the 2 which I've highlighted. I would click OK. And then it'd just be a case of going into a completely different survey and file and import. And again, a SNF file. Okay. And you can do the same, exactly the same you can do with your tables and charts and your derived variables as well. But when you are exporting different reports and things into different surveys, you just need to bear in mind that obviously a report is generally looking for a table and chart. So it's quite likely that you're going to need to also export some of your tables and charts. So again, exactly the same, file and export. And then of course your tables and charts are quite likely going to be talking back to particular questions. So yes, it could be your actual questions, but quite likely it's looking for things like the benchmark variable or the compare variable. So yes, when you are exporting things, you just need to bear in mind, sometimes it's not just a case of exporting one thing, you also need to export all the things which it's speaking to as well. Okay, now our final topic that I wanted to show you today is something called conditional inclusion. And this is a really, really powerful element of smart reporting, which dynamically changes the content of the report based upon whether you've hit certain targets or not. So it's not just a case of saying the report will always display everything, apart from obviously it's going to have some dynamic text in there from time to time. It could be that certain elements of your report display if your data is good, and certain elements will display if your data is not so good. So I'm actually making use of it in this report number 3. So you can see I've got my mini reports, and I've got a report called Too Few. Now, Too Few is literally just a report which says, if I just quickly run that one, it's a one-page report which basically says, unfortunately, there's not enough people to run this report, because of course a lot of smart reporting is based on benchmarking your data, sorting it top to bottom, comparing it against other departments. And if you've only got 2 replies in this week, then actually benchmarking your data can sometimes be a little bit misleading. So often people will put restrictions on there to say, if there's not enough people for one particular time period, don't run the report. So if I double click on my Too Few report, there's some effectively a bit like cell referencing going on. I've got a table called AM base, and if the data coming out of AM base in that particular cell reference is greater than 19, so if there's at least 20 people, this report will not run. Because in my example, I'm saying there needs to be at least, as long as there's 20 people, this report can run. Whilst if I look at the other sections, if there's less than 20 people, this report will not run. So as I said, I've taken the decision that actually, if there's less than 20 people, I don't want the main report to run. I will only have unfortunately there's not enough people, and assuming there's at least 20 people, I will get everything apart from the Too Few. Okay. So it's a little bit like routing in a questionnaire where you specify when something will pop up in the survey. But in our case, we're specifying when a part of a report will pop up. And I said that's often easier to do by having these mini reports where you can just say that complete section of the report will, or in fact, will not show up. Okay, so I said it's very much like routing, but rather than saying when will it pop up, you're saying when will it not pop up. Okay. Now, I was actually using a different example of conditional inclusion on report number 2. So in my report, in fact, I will just quickly preview the report a second. I look at Harriet's data. I've got the question at the bottom saying what the average score for Harriet was and comparing that against the average for everyone else. And you can see it's saying it's 6% lower. Now, obviously, sometimes the data might be higher, or in fact, sometimes it might be exactly the same. So in my report, I've actually got 3 different statements which pop up depending on whether this is higher, lower, or the same. So here's my 3 different statements. Again, I've got lots of dynamic cell referencing going in there. And I've got a statement about it being lower, but that will only pop up. In fact, more importantly, it will not pop up if my data is at least positive. So if the table called diff has a positive result in, I don't want to be saying it being lower because it's not lower, it's positive. And then if we look at higher, this time it's a statement all about being higher. So this time, this statement will not pop up if actually it's 0 or below 0 because it's not higher than, it's 0. And then I've got a completely different statement popping up for if the result's exactly the same. So this time, because I've got a not in here, I'm actually saying this statement will pop up if the data is 0. So if there's no difference between the individual trainer and everyone else, then you're going to get a statement saying, interestingly, it's the same average score. Okay. A more elaborate example of this could be having multiple introductions. So in my case today, I've got 2 parts of an introduction, picking out the top 3, bottom 3. But it could actually be that I've got 3 different variations of this. One which pops up if your data is overall pretty good, so with a fairly positive introduction. One which is set to pop up if your data is not doing so good, so maybe a bit more of a, we're not doing so well this month, here's where it's all gone wrong. And then one which pops up if your data's sort of fairly average and you're doing okay. Okay. Or you could use it to display completely different tables or charts. So in report number 1, down the bottom, I had 2 very similar charts, C5A positive bench and C5A negative bench, and I'll just quickly show you those. I've got the negative bench, which is picking out the percent negative, so the very poor and the poor. And then I've got the percentage positive, picking out the good and very good. Obviously what you've got in the middle is the neutrals, the ones who clicked OK. But in my report, I've got them both added to my report, but actually I've got an expression on there to say only display the positive one, so the green one, if my data, in fact, so again, it's a negative, so don't display the green one if my data is below 50%. So if it's less than 50% positive, do not show the positive one. And then for the negative one, if it's at least 50% positive, don't show the negative one. So basically in my report, I will never see both of those charts. I will only ever see one or the other. And again, I'll just run that just to prove that. So you can see I've got the percent positive for me. And in fact, I think they're all positives, to be honest. In fact, there you go, Margaret's a negative. So the negative one appeared. Okay. So with some careful planning, you can create some really tailored reports and bespoke reports, which, although they are mass produced, they have the feel as though they've been individually, manually written on a weekly basis. So just because you're mass producing reports, you don't just have to throw tables and charts at people and say, there's your data. You can still produce tailored, personalized reports, which look like you've put lots and lots of effort in. And yes, you did initially put lots of effort in, but actually every time that report's run, in the space of sort of about 10 seconds, you might have 15 or 16 individual personalized reports. Okay, now I appreciate that I've been giving you a really, really quick overview of smart reporting. And for that reason, I was using some fairly sort of simple examples and well, unexciting looking reports, to be honest. So I just wanted to finish off this section before I hand back to Nikki, just to show you some of the reports that our smart reporting team, or sorry, our research team here at Snap Surveys have produced recently. So I've got a couple of sort of, well, slightly more exciting looking reports, to be honest. So this is a report which we did for Youth Sport Trust, and they were looking at sort of physical education in schools. And you can see it's just the reports have got lots more sort of images in there. They're broken up into sort of different sections, and generally just to look a bit more colourful. So there's a sort of effectively a bit like a poster section at the beginning, and then it goes into a more traditional report at the end. This is a report which was actually done for a zoo. So again, we've got some key bits of data in there at the top, but then when we go on to the next page, and in fact the top three and the bottom three, but then when we go on to the next page, I just zoom in, is actually backtracking our data for the last sort of 12 months. So looking at the average score for customer services for this month, but then backtracking the previous 12 months and overall enjoyment. And again, just gives quite a nice sort of overview to all your data. This is a staff survey, so not too exciting to be honest, but again, just looks nice and professional. We've got a number of different types of charts for different departments. You can see how I'm moving through. I've got my different sections of the survey. This next one's a really big report, to be honest. It's actually 69 pages because actually it was done in English and Welsh. So the first sort of section, the first half of the report is all in English, and then the second half of the report is all in Welsh. So again, this one's got lots and lots of sort of images all over the place to pick out the key bits of data. And it's actually just using cell referencing as we were earlier. So that will be pointing off to an ugly table somewhere and just saying R1C1, and that one's probably saying R1C2 and R1C3, etc. The key difference is we've inserted some images just to sort of draw the eye. And again, it sort of breaks out into a more traditional sort of report, sort of the further we go in. This next one is another big report. And again, this has got lots and lots of, to a certain extent, random images. But they break up the report. They draw sort of your attention. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter what the image is. As long as it's vaguely related to what you're talking about, it will do the job of drawing the attention to whatever sort of key figure that you're actually trying to draw your attention to. And as I said, the key difference between these sorts of these reports which I'm showing you is more just the fact that they have got a few, I said to a certain extent, random images in. And those images have been added using one technique which I haven't shown you yet, which I'm just about to, which is something which is known as a text grid. And this is a good example of a text grid, where it's basically a plain table with some text in there and some cell referencing in there. And it just allows you to insert images and text in key specific places. So it just gives you a bit more control over where things are placed on the page. Okay. And final example, this was done for a hospital group in Wales, and they had 10 different hospitals, and I think around about sort of 450 different hospital wards. And again, it's actually just making use of everything we've done today, just with a bit more effort into the layout, really. So we've got the equivalent of who was your trainer today, or who was the instructor. So which hospital ward were you in? Let's look at all of the hospital wards within that hospital. And then let's look at the health board, which is all 10 hospitals. So that one has ward equals ward at context. So a bit like I had instructor equals instructor at context. That has a filter on there of hospital equals hospital at context. And the final one just says true. So that includes everyone. Okay. So as I said, I'm just going to quickly show you what a text grid is, because actually it is really useful when you want to lay your data out sort of in specific areas. So I'm just going to take you back into Snap to finish off. And I'm going to take you into this survey. So this is the ward or hospital ward. In fact, actually, I'm going to take you into this one first. So this is this one where we've got lots of data in these, what we call sort of boxes. And if I go into the report, you can see I've got my text grids. So if I take you into a text grid, sorry, not that one. So a text grid is basically a chart with a number of rows and columns. And as I said, it's just got some text at the top, so manually input text, and then just cell referencing. In fact, this is cell referencing with a calculation, so it's adding two cell references together, and that produces sort of just nice layouts. Okay. Also, if I take you into a different report, again, this is making use of a couple of things that we've done today. So this is this report. So down the bottom, we've got a male and a female with some cell referencing above. So there's my text grid. So 1 row, 2 columns. So cell referencing at the top, and then just with an inserted picture, so an inserted image. Okay. So I said it's just a way of having effectively an empty table with so many columns and rows, and then in those columns and rows you can manually type, or you can insert your cell values. Okay. But at the top, I briefly talked a little bit about conditional inclusion. So we're working out whether they're in first, second, or third place, or first to 10th place. So I've got 1 which actually displays the results, but only if there's at least 6 people. And if there's less than 6 people, it instead says for that particular section, you still get the same text grid, but it just says there's too few people to actually rank people. Okay, so appreciate I've given you a very, very quick sort of whistle-stop tour of what smart reporting is. There is lots and lots of support on our help desk, on our support hub, on our website, so snapsurveys.com. Lots of interactive tutorials and worksheets. Also a couple of ones which sort of relate particularly to the stuff I've been talking about today, so number 96, 97 and 98. And I believe you will be getting an email with a recording of this, and also sort of some links off to some of these worksheets. But I'm now going to hand you back to Nikki to see if there's any questions.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Nikki. So have we got any questions come in?
Thank you so much, Nathan, for that presentation. Anyway, I have your question coming from Sudhir. But Sudhir, we will be can we arrange another call to go through setting up a questionnaire? I will be sending an email regarding setting up a questionnaire. Anyway, I have here a question for you, Nathan. One of the reports had a notes section, and how was this added?
All right, yeah, good question. So yeah, that was, I think referring back to, I think it was this report, where every now and again there was a sort of a little note section. So yeah, this was actually a report where the idea was actually the report was produced, it was then taken back to the manager, but actually someone sat down and sort of effectively went through the report with them, and there was a note section so they could sort of make their own notes as they were sort of sitting down, sort of going through this report. And it was actually just produced. You could do it in different ways, to be honest, but if I just create, I'll put it in this one. If I was to create a new report, you could just add a new information window in, and you could actually insert a picture of a note, or in this example, what was actually done, it was inserted an image. And I think I might have one on my desktop here somewhere. So you probably won't be able to see this too well, but that's basically just an image of the word notes. And then if I now add the individual lines, the idea is that the benefit of doing it this way, I'm just going to copy that a second, is that you can just keep adding additional lines, because of course sometimes you're going to have a note which needs to be a couple of lines deep. So having it as individual line images, it just means that I can keep adding additional lines in as long as I need them to be. Okay. Any other ones, Nikki?
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yes, I have another question here. Does your tables and charts have different names rather than AN1, etc.? How do you do this?
Yeah, so as you probably sort of got from me sort of doing this today, smart reporting, it isn't a quick sort of 5-minute job. It does take a lot of planning, and there's a lot of sort of complex stuff going on with all these, and you will realize that getting as organized as you can makes your life a lot easier, particularly when you come to look at this in sort of 6 months time and make edits to it. If you've just got a long list of AN1 to AN 500, a bit like I've got at the top here, it gets really confusing. So what I tend to do is try and name them based on what they are. So my tables all begin with T, my charts all begin with C, and then I try to give an indication of what they're actually doing, just so I know that when I'm looking at them in a report, I know roughly what they're doing without having to actually go into them. So it's just a case of, if I go into this one maybe, so this is just a fairly boring bar chart, but if I go into the properties of it,
Okay.
so it defaults to AN1 or AN2, etc. Analysis 1, analysis 2. So I'm just over typing this with C for chart, and I said I'd probably call it 3. And because this one has been ordered top to bottom, I'd probably call it C3 ordered, just so I know every time I look at this. I can find it now. Oh, there it goes. So I know that straight away, without even looking at that chart, I know that it's a chart based on question 3 and it's been ordered top to bottom. Okay. Any others?
Yeah, I have here last question for you is how do we add mini reports to create our larger report?
Yeah, we talked about the fact that, yes, I've got these mini reports, which tends to make things a bit easier to work with. So yeah, just like you would and if you're inserting a table or chart, to be honest. So if I was to create a brand new report,
Okay.
obviously I've shown you reports I've already done. It's a case of clicking on the plus, and this, just whilst I'm here, is how you then add in your page layout to say whether it's portrait or landscape. But if you want to add a table, then you execute a table or chart. And this again is where having those tables or charts named really does start to make things a lot easier. And then, but your question was actually how to add a report. So exactly the same, I'll just delete that. Instead of executing a table or chart, you just execute a report. So all your reports sort of sit at the top. So you could do a cover page, then I execute a blank page. And you can see just by me doing this, just how easy, once you've done a lot of this work the first time, or maybe after you've done 2 or 3 reports, going forward, producing your sort of future reports becomes a lot quicker, because it is just a case of pulling through this report that you produced previously. Okay, so did you say, I think, Nikki, that was probably the last of them?
Yes, actually, that's the last question I have for you. All right, so thank you so much for the presentation of Smart Reports in Snap today. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar today, or the Kwiklearn series, Smart Reports in Snap, and presented by Mr. Nathan Richard. Nita?